Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 151. Worthy of Consideration. It was getting late. Zashi had already fallen asleep on him as they waited for Izuku to come home. Shinso-san had texted him to let him know she was driving all the kids who didn't have a chauffeur home herself. So he should be back any minute now. Shota hadn't been paying attention to whatever was playing on the TV for a dangerously long time, and his eyelids were drooping. Surely the door opening would wake him up, right? He could rest his eyes for a second. He woke up to his foot being nudged. He had forgotten how quiet the kid could be. Sorry, I just thought you would probably hurt your neck sleeping like that, the foot nudger in question explained. He grunted a vaguely thank-you-shaped sound and nodded. The kid was right. His neck already hurt, and it had only been like 20 minutes. She must have dropped Uraraka off first. He yawned, rubbed at his eyes, and was surprised to see Izuku still standing there when the resulting blurriness abated. Though he was thankful that he was still there, Zashi would have killed him if he didn't wake them up in time for Izuku to see his gift. I just wanted, thank you. You didn't have to do all that for me, Izuku stuttered out sheepishly. He wanted to insist that it was practically the bare minimum, and yes, he did need to do that in order to maintain his status of being a mildly decent human being. But he knew Izuku wouldn't want to hear that, so he didn't bother arguing the point. You have fun? He asked instead. Yeah. What'd you get? He asked another question because Izuku was still standing there with a gift bag in hand. Lingering wasn't a common occurrence, and he didn't want to do anything to scare him away. Izuku pressed his lips into a fine line, and his eyes went wide, but he didn't leave. Todoroki and Ida got me a Switch, he explained the reaction. Shota snorted out a laugh in response, and the shuffling was enough for Zashi to start stirring. It pays to have rich friends, he remarked as Hizashi slowly found his way back to wakefulness. Shinso got me some stationery stuff. Shinso-san made me a recipe book, and Uraraka made the cake, he answered with a small but genuine smile. Cake? Zashi mumbled groggily. Shota laughed at his obvious sweet tooth and was glad to see Izuku smiling too. Past tense cake, Zash, he clarified. Hizashi frowned as he stretched the sleep out of his bones. I brought it back with me. Shinso-san made me take the whole thing, Izuku assured. Oh, happy birthday, kiddo. Zashi finally woke up. Not technically, Shota corrected, pointing at the clock, which had ticked past midnight. Don't be a party pooper, they shot back, shoving his face away as they stood up. Shota just rolled his eyes at their antics. He would never understand how they could be so energetic less than a minute after waking up. He watched as Hizashi had the same conversation he had just had with Izuku, though he was far more animated about it. They had the kid pull everything out of the bag and show it to them. They were good gifts. He was glad Izuku had such thoughtful friends. Well, you got one more, kiddo. Well, two more. 2 for 1, 3 for 2. It's from us and All Might, and there's 2 of them, they explained, tripping over their own words in excitement. Don't worry, it's nothing crazy. I made sure of it. He butted in when Izuku made the same face he made before telling Shota he'd gotten a Switch. It's in your room already. Come on, Hizashi urged them forward. I think gift giving is his love language. He's always like this, he muttered to Izuku as they followed behind. Sho, come here. Don't turn the light on yet. It's a surprise. Hizashi pulled him forward and slapped his hand away from the light switch before he could flip it on. They pulled him aside and let Izuku flip the light on once they were out of the way. It didn't take him long to find the difference, as it was pretty obvious. Two gaudy red, blue, and yellow posters now hung in sturdy frames on the walls. Each of them were signed and apparently vintage, according to Yagi. A friend of mine from high school. She was in general studies, ended up going to trade school, and she's a woodworker now. She made the frames. Obviously, the posters are from All Might, but this was Sho's idea. Check this out, Hizashi explained. He pressed on the right side of the frame, a mechanism clicked, and the frame popped forward, swinging out from a hinge on the left. Behind the poster revealed a hidden cabinet just deep enough to fit a gridded organizer. In each little cubby was a knife. It didn't fit Izuku's entire klepto collection, but if they had ordered enough to fit all of them, the whole room would have been covered floor to ceiling. He figured he could just stick his favorite ones in there, and the rest would stay stuffed away in the suitcase. Hizashi was practically vibrating with excitement, and Izuku was standing frozen in the doorway with his mouth agape. Shota wasn't surprised to see his eyes getting glassy. Izuku cried a lot. He hadn't been sure if that was just because of the circumstances that brought him here, or if he was just a crier, but it was starting to seem like it was the latter. It was nice to see this part of him. Ivy wasn't really a crier. Sure, they cried, but that was different. Those were, I'm having a crisis cries, and it had only happened like 3 times. Ivy didn't let themselves feel enough to cry any more than that, but Izuku did. That was probably a good thing, right? Zashi was always going on about feeling your feelings, like it was a good thing. Oh, sweetheart, Hizashi cooed as Izuku's tears finally spilled over his cheeks. You like it, right? It's a good cry? They clarified as they pulled him into a hug. He could see Izuku nod against Zashi's chest. The hug didn't last long, and when Izuku pulled away, he looked nervous. He was looking at the floor, focus darting around, but never staying long, like he wasn't actually thinking about what he was seeing, and he was chewing at his lip. After a moment of contemplation, Izuku looked up at him. He gave a few false starts to his sentence before he finally got the words out. Thank you, he said simply, though the resolve behind those 2 words spoke far more than the words themselves. Of course, kid, he replied easily, doing his best to imbue the words with as much sincerity as Izuku had. He'd never been very good at that. His voice was too monotone. It made him seem like he didn't care, which in all fairness was true a lot of the time. But this was not one of them. No, I mean, it's not just, I know what you mean. My answer is the same. He saved him from trying to scrounge up words for the feelings that were so clearly written across his face. The poor kid bit his lip to keep it from trembling. He didn't need to spread himself out so thin. After a few beats, they seemed to reach an understanding. He turned his attention to Hizashi and thanked him just as earnestly. They dismissed themselves to get some real sleep pretty quickly after that. With the proper lighting in Izuku's room, it was clear to see how exhausted he was. They all needed some sleep. Neither he nor Zashi spoke until they were well out of earshot and in their own room. That went well, don't you think? Zashi asked once they closed the door behind them. Yeah, I'll have to ask Shinso-san how the rest went, he replied. He said he had fun, they argued. Doesn't mean he did. Could just be saying that. I'm sure he had some amount of fun. It was the picture-perfect stock standard party. It's just what he needed, whether he knows it or not. You said it yourself. He needs normal experiences, Hizashi insisted. Normal experiences. He wished he could guarantee normal experiences for this kid forever, but he was already harboring another bit of trauma for him up his sleeve. He didn't want to taint this experience with the news that his father had passed, but Zashi was probably right. They were usually right about things like that. He hoped that Izuku wouldn't be mad for keeping this from him. He just couldn't help the niggling feeling that if he had told Izuku beforehand, then that party would have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Again. Yeah, he trailed off. What are you thinking about? I still haven't told him. He answered reluctantly. I know. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this, he admitted. Well, do you think he'd do better with the information if he had something to do afterwards? Like a distraction? Maybe, probably, I don't know. Thursday night then. Make a plan and stick to it. If he would feel better with a distraction, he'll have school the next day. And if he'd rather be alone, he'll only have one day of school to get through. Or he could stay home. I'd be sure to offer that option because you know he won't ask for that himself. They laid out a plan like it was obvious. How did they do that? They just knew what to do all the time. It was insufferable. Yeah, okay. Thursday. When Mike and Eraser left for the night, Izuku just sat down at the desk chair and stared at the wall. He knew tears were running down his face, but he paid them no mind. He'd dehydrate himself, or they'd stop on their own volition eventually. No one had ever afforded him this much thought before. He'd never allowed someone to know him well enough to do so in the first place. The fact that so many people both knew him and cared enough to think about him was, it hurt. It hurt to know that they cared about someone with a quirk, someone who he apparently was now. Somehow that someone didn't feel like him. He liked to think they would still have cared if they knew who he used to be, but he wasn't so naive. Shinso had said he wouldn't care, and part of him believed that. Or maybe he just wanted to believe that. Did everyone always have this capacity for kindness? What was so wrong about not having a quirk that he wasn't granted even a glimpse of this before? Some part of him wanted to tell them the truth. Maybe he just wanted to sabotage himself. Either way, that wasn't an option. He'd already pushed his luck telling Shinso what he had told him. Who he used to be was exactly that. It was the past. He wasn't that person anymore. He is who he is now, and for better or worse, people care about that person. That's what he needed to focus on. He was so grateful for what he had now. It was only ruining a good thing to dredge up the past. Midoriya, 9:07 a.m. Thanks for the posters. They're so cool. All Might, 9:12 a.m. Of course, my boy. I wanted to say happy birthday yesterday, but I didn't want to ruin the surprise. So happy belated birthday. Young Midoriya had texted him about the gifts he had passed on to Aizawa Sunday morning. He wished he could have seen his reaction in person so that he could know whether he actually liked them or not, but he trusted Aizawa when he told him that the gift giving was going to be a difficult endeavor and it'd be better not to pressure him. He had caught a glimpse of the boy in the halls earlier in the day, but they hadn't gotten the chance to talk to any meaningful degree since the rather dreadful all-for-one discussion. He hoped that he'd be the first out of the changing rooms again today, so they could chat, even if it was only for a little while. It seems fortune favored him today, because he could see a spot of green enter the gym before anyone else joined them. Good afternoon, young Midoriya, he greeted. Hi, All Might. Did you have a nice birthday? He asked, a little quieter once Midoriya got closer. Oh, yeah, it was good. Shinso threw me a surprise party, he answered with what looked to be a genuine smile. Toshinori honestly didn't know anymore. How wonderful! Yeah, it was really nice. It was good. Midoriya fumbled through and doubled back on himself. He could imagine what the end of that sentence was going to be. He'd never had many birthday parties himself, not since he was very young. The first time he celebrated it in ages was his 21st birthday in the States. Dave had found out about his lackluster celebrations in the past and went on a crusade to remedy that. Apparently, 21st birthdays were special in the States. Needless to say, he didn't remember most of that night, but the moments he could recall were some of his favorite memories from his college years. "It's nice to have a friend like that," he replied knowingly. Further elaboration on that point probably wasn't school appropriate. "Thanks for the posters again. Are those original prints?" he asked with an air of excitement. He was glad to see the boy getting excited over things a child is supposed to be excited about. "Yes, nothing but the best for you, my boy." "You didn't have to go through the trouble. Those are—" "You're worth the trouble." He cut him off resolutely. Toshinori reached out a hand to pat his head. He didn't flinch away from him like he used to when they had first met. He did his best to focus on the positives of that realization and not the nausea in his gut that surfaced when he thought about why he flinched in the first place. "Thank you," Midoriya repeated again. Shoto hadn't meant to eavesdrop. Well, that wasn't true. He did mean to eavesdrop, but he figured it was only fair after what Midoriya had done for him. He'd poked around Shoto's life without prompting to give him a ticket out of there, so Midoriya deserved the same in return, right? Midoriya had said that things were better for him now, but if things were really better, then why hadn't Midoriya's parents hosted his birthday themselves? Several things didn't sit right with him, and the strangely close relationship he had with All Might was one of them. Midoriya was much quieter than All Might was, so he couldn't hear any of his half of the conversation. But All Might, knowing when his birthday was and getting him a gift, went past the normal student-teacher bond. Or at least it did as far as he knew. Was All Might playing favorites? Did they know each other before UA? Was it as simple as having a similar quirk? Not for the first time, he wished he knew how normal relationships functioned. He couldn't say for certain if any of their behavior was irregular, and thus he couldn't extrapolate anything off of it. He was kidding himself, wasn't he? Midoriya was much better at this. He was just stumbling around with no real purpose and being nosy. He should just join them. "Young Todoroki, good afternoon," All Might greeted him like he always did, and Shoto nodded in response like he always did. He couldn't bring himself to believe that All Might was doing anything nefarious, and perhaps that was childish. There were probably people who believed that Endeavor was just as virtuous, but no matter which way he looked at it, he couldn't find a believable scenario where All Might was the problem. Even still, if he knew what was going on between those two, maybe that would help him figure out what the real issue was. He just wanted Midoriya to be safe too, but he had no clue how to do that. Why the hell was Icy Hot spying on Deku? Katsuki had just walked around the corner to see him standing just out of sight of the pair, or at least who he assumed to be the pair talking. Deku was always out of the changing room first, damn teacher's pet. He couldn't hear Deku, but he could hear All Might talking to someone. The words were difficult to make out at this distance, but he's pretty sure he heard birthday and wonderful, which wasn't exactly a helpful pool of clues to piece together. Was it someone's birthday? Oh, yeah. Deku's birthday was a few days ago, right? Whatever. It's not like he keeps tabs on that kind of shit. Why the hell did All Might know that, though? He didn't get a happy birthday on his birthday. The hell makes Deku so special? He really was the teacher's pet. He could barely even look at the nerd without Hobo Sensei glaring daggers at him ever since school started. And he'd been buddy-buddy with All Might since day one as well. Loudmouth, too, now that he thought about it. Since when had Deku been fluent in English anyway? God, that asshole pissed him off. The more he watched him, the less sense he made. He could fight like a monster, but the moment the exercise was over, he was back to wringing his hands and stuttering, looking more pathetic than a wet chihuahua. He had some sort of beef with Troll Doll, and now they were practically skipping around campus hand in hand. It's like everything he did, he had to do the opposite as well. Katsuki had been planning on getting some answers out of him, but there had yet to be a time when Hobo-sensei wasn't looming over them and Deku hadn't scurried away to hide in whatever crack in the wall he disappeared into when no one was looking. He would say he'd seen how Deku had changed since starting UA, but that wasn't a remarkable observation. He'd done little but change, which was the strange part. He used to be such a predictable coward, but now it was a complete toss-up every day. Apparently, he wasn't the only one looking for answers. Even his own damn friends were snooping on him. Not that he expected Icy Hot to figure it out. He was a clueless bastard. Katsuki was going to get to the bottom of this, though. It was just a matter of time. End of chapter.